Industry and power engineering are significant sources of pollution in Ostrava. Some people claim that when they arrive, they can smell the difference between the air here and, for example, in mountains. How do you feel about the air for breath in Ostrava?
Well, it's probably true because I haven't been to the mountains, so I don't actually know what the difference is. I think it's crucial that we recognize what's really important and what's not when you talk about environment. And a lot of people focus on the things that are easy to photograph. So, you know, the cute rabbit that's in danger of being exterminated, or the things that generate a lot of attention, you know, the people who are arguing against GMOs or something like that, or climate change that can present these outrageous scenarios. It's easy to capture people's attention. But it actually turns out, if you do the studies, what matters most in Ostrava, in the Czech Republic, probably in all of Europe, most of the rich world, it's outdoor air pollution. So by far it's the most important environmental issue. It's not easily photographable. It's, you know, it comes up to that sort of, it smells funny here. But the reality is it's the really, really ultra small particulates, the PM 2.5. Those are the ones that really are dangerous and kills a lot of people. So absolutely we should do something about it, and it's a cheap way to do it. And so my argument is, let's get our priorities straight. Let's remember to worry most about the things that are most dangerous and that we can do most to do something about at low cost. But we often don't. We end up focusing on the cute rabbits instead.
Okay, thank you. The hot topic of today's society, due to fires in Indonesia, for example, is the use and growing of the palm tree oil. Do you think that if us, common people, take part and decide not to buy food containing palm tree oil, it will lead to the fact that companies exclude such ingredients from their products? Will it help anything?
Yeah, I think there's a number of issues with the palm oil that are conflated. Mostly we would love to believe that if you and I, or sensible people around the world, decide we're going to do this, that's really going to change. Well, unfortunately, that's rarely true. What really matters is what we set of national policies and international policies. So it's much more a question of how do we set smart international policies. Now, there's a lot of things wrong with palm oil. We should also remember it's actually one of the reasons why a lot of people in the developing world have gotten cheap oil. Cheap cooking oil, which is a great boon. So it's not just an environmental problem, it's also actually something that's helped a lot of people have better lives. And then the real crucial bit is, if you look at what the EU did with their climate policy, which was to say we need blended gasoline, so we need to have oil in there, and a lot of that, at least at first, came from palm oil because it's one of the cheapest ways to produce it. Turns out to be one of the worst ways to help the environment. Probably you end up emitting more CO2 and more pollution, and you destroy the forest. So this is not about you and me making these decisions, because the reality is you and I can only make a few really sensible, well-informed decisions. But there's a multitude of things we have to make our decisions on. That's why we need global and regional regulation, but it needs to be smart. And unfortunately, the EU on that particular point weren't all that smart.
Okay. From your point of view, do you think it really makes sense to reduce emissions in developed countries, while in China and third world nobody cares about that? Moreover, there are natural processes such as volcanic eruptions which cannot be influenced.
So we're talking about CO2 here, just to make sure, because there's lots of other emissions that actually make sense. For instance, the things that make outdoor air pollution, the things that this whole place probably produced enormous quantities of, namely outdoor air pollution. But CO2, it absolutely makes sense to try to focus on how do we cut CO2, because CO2 in the long run will contribute to global warming, which in the long run is going to be a negative influence. The problem is we're right now trying to do that in a very, very ineffective way. We're trying to do that by subsidizing solar and wind, which probably cost on average about $90 to cut 1 ton of CO2, or by subsidizing, for instance, electric cars, where it costs upwards of $1,000 to cut 1 ton of CO2. To give you a sense of proportion, we estimate the net benefit of cutting a ton of CO2 is in the order of $5 per ton. So spending $100 or $1,000 to do $5 of good is a really bad deal. So it's about making sure we do the smart things. And as you point out, right now, China, India, and many other countries are quite honestly mostly busy getting rich or getting out of poverty, actually, making sure that their kids don't die from easily curable infectious diseases, get food, get a good education. Those are very, very basic and simple things. And certainly I can't, and I don't think any of us can honestly say, you shouldn't be doing that. You know, of course they should. But the truth is, then we need to make sure that we have the technology in place. That means you don't need to subsidize at $90 or $100 per ton of CO2, but yet you actually get cheap green energy. The US has actually gone ahead of doing that. They have seen a dramatic reduction in the cost of gas through their fracking of gas. So what they've seen is basically that gas has become a lot cheaper. That means about 8 to 10% of US electricity production has switched from coal to gas. That's huge. We've never seen anything like it. And why? Because gas is cheaper than coal. Now, this matters because gas emits about half as much CO2 as coal does. This was not the intention of the people who did fracking. They just wanted to find more fossil fuel. But the outcome is that we've actually gotten the biggest reduction in CO2 from any nation, including the EU, from the US, because they got cheap gas. Now, we should make sure that cheap gas gets to China and India, and many other places. Should also get to Europe, so we could stop using as much coal in Europe. That would be the great first step. In the long run, we need to make solar and wind and all the other green technologies so cheap that you don't have to subsidize them, but people will actually buy them simply because they're cheaper. But that's the solution, that's the sustainable solution, rather than the one that we do right now, where we pay unaffordable subsidies to a tiny fraction of reduction. It makes us all feel good and virtuous. You can see the wind turbine should feel all good about yourself, but the reality is you've done almost nothing for climate.
You really think that fracking has not serious influence on, for example, underwater sources or something like that?
So there's a lot of study, there's been a lot of concerns, and look, reasonable concerns, because you're fracking very often close to where people are living. So there's been some concerns about microtremors, so small earthquakes. There's been concerns about pollution of drinking water, and there's been the concern about emissions of methane. Now, a lot of this has been studied immensely in the US because there's been all these concerns. There's very little evidence of leaking into the groundwater. Remember, typically the fracking takes place roughly in 1,000 meters, and mostly we get our water from 50 to 100 meters. So it's much, much further down. So the only way you get the pollution is if the drill that goes through the water ends up polluting. We've done this for 100 years. We know very well how to avoid that. But yes, some companies, especially sort of mom and pop companies that have just come up, have not done that properly. So there has been some pollution of drinking water, but it's almost entirely avoidable with good regulation. So clearly we should have good regulation. The microtremors have almost no impact, and the methane that we've seen, first of all, you can actually cap a lot of it, again, good regulation, but even with the methane, it has not significantly degraded the impact of shale gas. So yes, there's definitely some concerns. Like everything else, you need good regulation. You can't just have everyone, wow, that's so much for my arguments, right? But you can't just have people go ahead and do everything. But you can definitely have much, much lower CO2 emissions by focusing on getting more gas, less coal. And one of the ways we can avoid making Putin rich in the process is through shale gas.
For me, it's absolutely unacceptable. Some European countries has a legal ban laws against the fracking now. So we will see in future.
Well, and that's obviously part of the problem with the whole environmental conversation. We end up being very emotionally engaged in a few things that make for great headlines. Fracking is one of those. It sounds wrong. I mean, fracking, just the word sounds wrong, right? And certainly, it can get earthquakes and it can pollute your drinking. No, we're not going to do that. But of course, you need to get a sense of proportion. And likewise with genetically modified food. yes, there are legitimate concerns. We've also addressed most of them, and actually almost entire scientific community, just like they're telling us global warming is real and something we need to worry about, they're also telling us genetically modified foods are safe. It's not the right place to worry. Again, let's worry about air pollution, not genetically modified foods or fracking. But the problem is, air pollution is old hat. It's sort of, oh God, we've heard about that for 100 years. Yes, but it's still by far the most dangerous thing.
You are participating in the Melting Pot Forum, which is a part of Colours of Ostrava, open air. So, do you have any favorite band here, or is the gender focus of this festival beyond your musical taste?
And I'm going to be incredibly depressing here. You've asked a guy who loves classical music, so yes, I'm sorry, I'm not the main target group here. But I came for the conversation. I've been very, very excited about both the audience interaction and the talks, and everybody seems very excited. So that part has been wonderful.
Okay, and your favorite composer? Do you have one?
That's a terrible question to ask because there's a lot of them. But if I had to just choose one, it would be Bach. Yes. There you go.
Thank you very much for our interview. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
All right. Thanks. Thank you. Thanks, guys.